Love you. Thank you. Thank you. I thank you. Appreciate you. Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. Put it at 5 minutes. Am I set? Can I read? Proper cup of coffee, made in a proper cup of coffee pot. I may be often do that, but I want a cup of coffee in a proper cup of pot. Tin coffee pots and iron coffee pots, they're no use to me. So I can't have a proper cup of coffee in a proper cup of coffee pot. I have to. I'm not pleasant with a flutter, fluffy, or present. I'm the most pleasant with a flutter, or something like present. Why? Why? For what reason? Test. Oh, hey, this is on. How about that? Hi. Hi. Holy shit, there's a lot of you. Hi, everybody. Hi. I'm MrCreepyPasta. I tell scary stories on the internet, and you guys are here to hear scary stories tonight, yeah? Yeah! Sweet. It's been a hot minute since I've been here, so thanks for having me back, everybody. Hi. So, for those of you that don't know what the Creepypasta Storytime panel is, because I've done this for a couple of years, back and forth. MomoCon's a really great con. They keep having me over here to do it. So, for those of you who don't know what it is, Creepypasta stories are stories that are generally like horror stories or urban legends that we like to tell that's copied and pasted around the internet, or copied and pasted, or creepy and pasted all over the internet. Over the past couple of half-decade, they've become less about like those kind of urban legend stories, more about things that are like online horror flash fictions or short fictions that end up being shared around. What I do is I narrate those things in a podcast or on a YouTube channel and do spooky things in my voice. So if you weren't expecting horror, you're not expecting something incredibly gross, if you guys aren't expecting something that's going to be jump scaring you, is not going to be trying to creep you into your brain in the middle of the night tonight, then this is probably not the panel you want to go for. Yeah. So last time you guys saw me, I had a full face mask on, and normally I will have a full face mask on, except for the last 2 years I got old. So now I need these to do my panel, and I haven't quite figured out how to work those into my face mask yet, so you guys get this. So I'll show you. Yeah, I have glasses now. I got old. Same glass? Yeah. So you guys are also going to be learning today. You ready for that? Because that's the best part of this panel. You guys show up. Turns out you're going to learn. It's not going to be the same thing you always expected. We're going to learn about horror today, everybody. Horror is made up of 3 different things, according to Stephen King. Some would say he's an authority. Stephen King says that horror is made up of 3 different things. The first one is called gross-out horror. Gross-out horror is when you just close your eyes with me and just pretend with me for a second, okay? You're in a completely dark room. It's humid. It's wet. You can hear the sound of something squelching as it slides off of the wall and into the floor, right? You could smell something rancid, like rotting meat. And when the light clicks on, you see something there that you don't want to see, something gross, something disgusting. Think about blood and guts and gore and poop and things like that you don't actually, things that you're afraid to see, that anxiety builds up to see. That is called gross-out horror. The second thing that Stephen King marks out is called horror, surprisingly. When you're in that dark room and you could feel breath on the back of your neck, and you could feel something brush past you that you don't see. You hear the scrape of metal against the wall. You see sparks come off of it. And when the light turns on, there's something there that can physically hurt you or another character. We're talking about your Jason Voorhees, your Freddy Kruegers, your Xenomorphs, something there physically that can hurt them or you. And the final thing, that a lot of people like to call psychological horror. But all horror is psychological. That's going to be what I'm beating through your brain today. You get that? Psychological horror, that whole phrase, throw it out. All horror is psychological. I'm fucking with your mind. The final thing is called terror. And terror is when you're in that dark room and you can smell rotting meat. You can hear the drip of something wet in the room. You can hear the scrape. You can feel breath on the back of your neck. But when the light turns on, there's nothing there. Because really, all these things aren't scary. They're just the situation that plays with your mind that creates that feeling of terror. So these 3 different forms of horror are what we're going to play with today. Sound good? Yeah. I'm going to give you guys an example of gross, of horror, and then finally we're going to wrap up with an example of terror. Hopefully these will be things that you guys haven't heard before, and if they are, then oops. I have these pulled out. They're all also, if you guys have seen the channel, these are written for me by Vincent Menacava, who's one of my favorite authors, a very good friend of mine. Yeah. And he wrote this to be for the show. So we're going to start off with gross-out horror, which means you guys can take a look around right now. Everybody around you, they're not all going to be here when this one's done. Because a bunch of people a bunch of people thought they were getting Jeff the Killer, and it turns out to be about the tapeworm. Here, this is a story called Out of Me. All right, listen. I'm going to start off with a bit of a warning before we get into this. I recommend that you put down whatever it is you might be munching on at the moment and save it for later. Now, if you're a stubborn ass like me, you couldn't care less what some jackoff from the internet asks you to err on the side of caution, then, you know, at least try to chew your food quickly and swallow it down as fast as possible. You want to give your meal time to settle before I get to the 3rd act of the story. And don't say that I didn't warn you, okay? Well, and one last thing. If you decided to ignore that little tidbit of advice,
then I really, really hope that you aren't eating spaghetti. And let's start the story. I've always been a fat ass, all right? My earliest childhood memory is my Nana poking me in the stomach and making fun of how jiggly it was. "You're such a chubby little porker," she would say. It's kind of a shitty thing for a grandma to do, right? Yeah, well, that bitch died 10 years ago from lung cancer, so who's laughing now? See, I wasn't the cool fat kid either. You know, the chubber who gets to hang out with the popular kids, score the pity dates to homecoming from girls that are too afraid to go stag. No, see, I was bullied, and pretty mercilessly at that. Maybe it's because of how big I was, you know. Fat is more of an understatement, really. At my heaviest, I was a shade under 400 pounds, which means I was more of a walking whale than a guy with a weight problem. I have no one to blame but myself, really. See, I hate exercising. Health food makes me want to puke. When it comes to food, the less nutritious, the better. Chocolate milkshakes? I'll fuck with that. Fettuccine Alfredo, the creamier, the better. Greasy-ass food court pizza. Extra sausage, extra pepperoni, extra cheese. No veggies, please. It's an addiction, I get it. What can I say? I love to eat. My doctor used to always tell me that if I didn't clean up my act, I was going to die. And when I hit 30, he really started to ramp up the rhetoric, you know, the gout, the cardiac disease, stroke. "Do you want to lose a foot to diabetes, bro?" My doctor didn't call me bro. I added that part in myself, but I feel like it really helped emphasize the point that he was trying to make. You know, "Bro, you're killing yourself, bro." And it wasn't like I didn't try to lose the weight. I took up jogging for a week. I even tried Weight Watchers. But no matter what I did, I couldn't break my addiction to sweets and fatty foods. It was all that made me happy. And I never saw myself being able to quit it, so I resigned myself to the fact that I'd probably meet an early death. I mean, if you want to live to be 100, you got to give up all the things that make you want to live to be 100. And where's the fun in that? And all that being said, it should come as no surprise to you that I love the county fair. I mean, if you've never been, then you really should check it out. It's a food lover's paradise. I suppose it would also be a goat fucker's paradise, but I don't go there for the petting zoos, okay? I go there for the food. It has everything that you can think of in some ridiculous concoctions you could have never imagined. Deep-fried butter, bacon-wrapped cinnamon buns, inside-out grilled cheese sandwiches. Have you ever had a hot beef sundae? Don't bash it till you try it. So about a year ago, I was at the fair hunting for something ridiculous to shovel down my gullet, and there were so many options, I didn't know what to eat first. I had contemplated a stand for macaroni cupcakes, one that sold something called a bacon explosion. And then the sign of one of the food trucks that was tucked away in the corner caught my eye. The sign read, "Franken-sausage." It was hot as balls, and the lines at the other food places were huge, so I waddled my lard ass over to the cart to see what Franken-sausages were all about. And the carny working the cart seemed like the type of guy who spent his evenings at the petting zoo, if you catch my drift there. Now, I know I won't be on the cover of GQ, so I probably don't have much room to talk here, but, this guy looked like somebody took the bassist from ZZ Top and put him in the microwave. I mean, his beard hung down past his chest. I don't think he washed it once in the past 20 years. There may have been a bird nesting in it for all I knew. His mouth was a dentist's worst nightmare. You could probably count the amount of teeth he had on one hand. He nodded at me and met my eyes as I approached. Sort of. See, one of his eyes stared straight ahead, but the other was planted firmly at 3 o'clock. I mean, seriously, if looks could kill, this guy could kill around corners. "Franken-sausages, eh?" I said. Kind of missed a golden opportunity to call them Franken-Franks. He nodded, but I don't think he got my joke. I waited a while for him to say something, but he just sat there quietly, looking simultaneously at myself and the jump castle about 10 feet off to my right. What's a Franken-sausage anyway? I asked. "Got every kind of meat you can think of," he responded in a raspy voice. I was actually impressed he could speak with all of just 4 teeth. 3.5. "Pork and beef and chicken, turkey and lamb and cat and llama and guinea pig, and the list goes on." He told me that he buys leftover meat from the processing plants. He catches the cats, he breeds the guinea pigs himself. He didn't tell me where he got the llama from, and I didn't ask. Oh, wait, you think I didn't eat that shit after I found out what was in it? What, have you not been paying attention? I told you, I was a fat ass. When else would I get the chance to eat 8 different animals in one sitting? I told him to slather it in nacho cheese, too. And you know what? Tasted pretty good. So I went on with my day of binge eating at the fair after that, and by the time I was halfway through my second chocolate chip funnel cake, I had completely forgot about the inbred carny and his freaky Franken sausage. Now fast forward about a month. I noticed that my 4XL slacks are a bit roomier than they used to be. Before I went to the fair, they had always been a little too snug to wear, and I was worried I'd have to go up in size. Had I been losing weight? My doctor confirmed my suspicions that day at his office, and when I went in for a physical. My God, you've lost 30 pounds. Have you been dieting? I didn't know what to say, so I explained to him that I started a new fast. In reality, I had been eating more than ever. All month, it was like my stomach had turned into a bottomless pit. I know I lied, but please don't judge me, all right? It was nice to hear him not nagging me for once. I left his office beaming that day, feeling hopeful about my weight problem for the first time in my life. Pounds just kept coming off. Even though I was eating like a pig, it didn't matter. I was feeling great and I was losing weight. There was one tiny little caveat, though. See, I'd been taking massive dumps. I mean, seriously, my craps could clear bathrooms. Not even the flies wanted to stick around. I figured I had somehow been shitting off the weight. But in 4 months, I had dropped 80 pounds. After 6 months, I was buying the smallest sizes at Big and Tall, and after 10, I was shopping in a normal person clothes store. I hadn't been under 300 pounds since 8th grade. You know, it's funny how differently people treat you when you're not as big as a house. Coworkers started inviting me over for happy hour. Strangers, they were just nicer to me on the street. I even managed to score a girlfriend. Life was good. I didn't care how or why I was getting skinnier. I just hoped that it would continue. And then one night I got to the bottom of the mystery. It was a quiet Saturday evening. I was chilling in my place with my girlfriend, watching a movie, and I felt this awful bubbling in my stomach. Oh boy, I thought to myself, this was gonna be a shit of biblical proportions. I excused myself to the bathroom, I locked the door, I dropped trowel, and I prepared myself for the crap to end all craps. I had just made it in time, and the second I sat down on the toilet, my butt, it erupted like Old Faithful. And it burned coming out, too, as if I was some kind of dyslexic dragon that farted fire instead of breathing it. And the smell was unbearable. I don't normally mind my own brand, but this stunk so bad it practically singed my nose hairs. Now, after a few minutes of my stomach, it finally gave me a bit of a reprieve, right? But I knew there was still more waiting to come out. And now, don't ask me why, but I stood up to take a look at what I had done. And call me curious, morbidly curious, in fact. I wanted to admire my work before I flushed it down, okay? And don't act like you haven't done the same. I had expected the inside of the toilet to be an absolute shit show. But I couldn't have possibly been prepared for what I was now looking at. The sight made my head spin. The walls of the toilet were stained red with blood. The water in the bowl was now so dark I couldn't see the bottom. It's like staring into some kind of stinky black hole. Traps light and expels a mind-numbing poo gas. But the thing that frightened me the most was not what was in the toilet bowl, but what was hanging out of it. A thin white strand about a half-inch in diameter, and it was still dangling from me. Oh my God, I thought to myself, this is it. My diet's finally caught up to me. I'm shitting out my intestines. It wasn't until I took a closer look and saw the thing hanging out of me was moving that I realized it wasn't my intestines at all. Although I'm not sure if the alternative was actually worse. I was passing a tapeworm, and a big one at that. If I had to estimate, there was already about 2.5 feet of it coiled up in the toilet bowl. Honey, I heard my girlfriend's voice on the other side of the door. Is everything okay? You've been in there for a while. Yeah, everything's fine, babe. Just a little stomach bug. At least it wasn't a lie, okay? Go watch the movie. I'll be out of here in a few. I needed this thing out of me immediately. I tried flushing, hoping the pressure would pull the tapeworm out of me and down the drain, but that didn't work. Now I could see it more clearly in the toilet's clear water, writhing and twisting in and out of itself like some kind of Lovecraftian turd from hell. I knew then that it was too big to flush away, and even if I did manage to get the worm out of me and down the drain, it would most likely clog it. And how was I supposed to explain that away to a plumber? I scooped the wriggling white mass out of the toilet and I plopped it into the sink. If I was going to remove this thing, I'd have to do it manually. So I bent over, I reached between my legs, and I began to pull. And pull. And pull more. Inch by inch, the slimy thing slid out of me, and I tried not to faint at the sight of it. This thing coated in blood, wriggling and writhing as I birthed it from my ass. The whole time that I worked, I cursed myself for eating that shady sausage at the fair. Felt like it took forever to completely remove the nasty parasite, and by the time I was done, I had pulled as much as 6 feet of the thing out and placed it into the sink. I stared down at it once I had finished, horrified at what had just come out of me. No wonder I had lost so much weight. The tapeworm was massive. It had been feeding off of me for close to a year, and then a new idea popped in my head. One that terrified me even more than the parasite wriggling around in my sink. See, all the good things that had been happening to me. The way that my doctor stopped nagging me. The new friends from work that I had made. My girlfriend, who I absolutely adored. It had all been from the weight loss. And I had the tapeworm to thank for that. Without it absorbing the nutrients from the junk food I'd been eating, I'd need to make some serious life changes in order to keep up with the weight loss, the working out, eating salads, giving up sweets. There's no way I'd be able to do that. I'd failed at it before. I knew I'd fail at it again. Soon enough, I'd get fat again, and my life would go back to being that sad, lonely existence it once was. I couldn't lose it. The worm was going into its death throes, and I was sure that it wouldn't survive for much longer without a host, but there was a way to prevent that. I mean, the worm didn't want to die, and I didn't want to get fat again. Maybe I thought, maybe it wasn't really a parasite at all. Maybe our relationship was mutually beneficial. Maybe we could help each other before it got too late. I plunged my hand into the sink and I began to fish around for the end of the tapeworm. See, I still had weight to lose. Another 8 months or so and my BMI would be in the healthy range. I reached for the end of the worm and I sucked the slippery thing into my mouth. Didn't taste as bad as I thought that it would, and I could feel it squirm all the way down into my stomach. Inch by inch, I swallowed it, forgetting about the fact the worm had just come out of me. It's just cold spaghetti, I told myself. Just cold spaghetti that tastes like asshole. Now, by the time I had downed the entire thing, I felt like I just cleaned out an entire Vegas buffet by myself. But even though I was uncomfortably full, I was positive that my plan would work. I left the bathroom, I sat back down on the couch, I unbuckled my belt, and I gave my girlfriend a big kiss on the lips. There's no way I was going to let her go. And that was 2 months ago. I've shed another 20 pounds since then. People are super impressed at how much weight I've been able to drop, but I'm not finished with my body transformation quite yet. No, I'd do anything to drop the weight. Every couple of weeks, that stubborn tapeworm tries to squirm its way out of me. And each time, it's longer and it's wider than it was before. But I've gotten better at swallowing it back down where it belongs. See, it has a job to do. I have a fitness goal, and I'm not letting it go until I lose the weight. The story called Out of Me. That is absolutely one of my favorite stories I've ever done. I want you to know, I've gone through this, gross out horror, terror build for this show for years. For years. But yes, oh, perfect. That is the grossest story I've ever done. I've done stories when it comes down to cutting out eyeballs. I've done stories about putting your hand in a blender. That one absolutely encompasses gross out horror in the best possible way. Plus, I mean, okay. So yes, it's a disgusting story, but also it's not one that's incredibly serious. I love that about horror. Horror is such a versatile genre, and you really get a chance to fuck around with like what is going to be horror. Like, I don't know if you guys ever watched my channel before. If you guys have seen it, there's a series. Yeah, there's a series on there called Tales from the Gas Station, and I think wonderful series. There's novels, check them out. But it's a wonderful series. But it's a wonderful series that really lets me play around with voices for one, but also lets the author really play around with what is horror. At what points does it become scary? At what points does it become funny? And I love that about Out of Me. I feel like it's so full of jokes, but at the same time, when that horror hits, when he reaches into that sink for that tapeworm, just, oof, absolutely perfect. Getting back to it though, so, after horror, gross out, we have horror. Horror is the next story that I have. If you guys have ever been to one of my shows before, you've heard this story, and you know why it's one of my favorite stories I've ever done. When I was a kid, way before I was MrCreepyPasta, when I was just a child, I was in elementary school, and they brought this storyteller over, I think in October or something like that. And he was like, oh yeah, we're just going to tell you like a fun little friendly story for children. It wasn't. It was a story, Taily-Po, and I'm sure lots of you guys have heard the story of Taily-Po before. And Taily-Po is one of those classic campfire stories. This guy told it to us. And if you remember at the end of it, the little creature breaks into the guy's house, tears him to shreds, and he's never heard from him again. He's just heard screaming sometimes in the woods. Horrifying story, scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. He didn't have anything but just his voice. That's all he did, was just this guy telling the story to a bunch of children, and it scared the shit out of me. So honestly, when I got started doing this, I kind of always wanted to have that same effect. I wanted to be able to do something with just my voice. I wanted to be able to tell a story. I wanted to be able to tell one that was like an old campfire story and really be able to hit it off with someone and let that be a lasting, horrific, traumatic memory for them. So I always do this story, and if you guys have been to one of my shows, you know how it ends. If you haven't been to one of my shows, don't worry. Nobody spoil it for them. This is a story called The Golden Arm. In 1880s Georgia, there lived a wealthy young woman in a grand plantation house. The woman's name was Annabelle Walters, and she inherited her fortune from her father, who had made his money in cotton farming. Now, her father had been cruel to his slaves, but tender to his wife and daughter. In 1864, baby Annabelle almost died in a fire set by William Sherman's soldiers on their march to the sea. Her mother saved her from death, but could not save her left arm, which was so badly burned that it had to be amputated. Now, the rest of Annabelle's body and her pretty face remained unscathed, but her father wanted the replacement for her arm to be as beautiful and as perfect as the rest of her. And so, when Annabelle was a teenager, her father had an arm cast out of solid gold. And everyone marveled at how shiny, yet how lifelike Annabelle's new arm was, even if it was cold and artificial. Annabelle's mother died of a fever not long after the casting of the golden arm. And a few years after that, her father died in a steamboat explosion. And so, young, lovely Annabelle Walters lived by herself in her family's old mansion with only an old dog named Ranger to keep her company. Of course, many bachelors wanted to marry Miss Walters for her wealth. They talked of love, they talked of affection, but Annabelle was no fool, and she turned down many a scheming suitor. But George was different. See, his family didn't come from wealth. He'd been a self-made rancher out west. But most importantly, he truly loved Annabelle for who she was and not for her money. The two wed, and they shared several happy years together. And then, one dreary October, Annabelle fell sick with the same fever that killed her mother. The doctors, the best and the most expensive doctors in the country, did all they could, but they could not save her. So by mid-November, lovely Annabelle lay on her deathbed, her beloved George beside her in the final hours. "George, darling, before I pass, I have one last request to impart upon you," she said. "Yes, my love, anything." "What is it?" he replied. "My arm, my golden arm. It's my most precious possession, more important to me than this house or any of my jewelry. Please, bury me in the ground with my golden arm," Annabelle said. "Yes, Annabelle, if that's what you desire, I shall." "Promise me, George. It's my final will upon this earth." George gulped before replying. I promise. I promise to bury you with your golden arm, darling." Annabelle fell silent and was dead within a few minutes. George and a few of Annabelle's cousins were the only ones to attend her funeral, and she was buried in the Walters family cemetery down the road from the mansion. In accordance with her last wish, George buried Annabelle with her golden arm. The night following the burial, George was sitting in front of the fireplace. Ranger, the dog, was asleep at his side. He thought about his future, thought about his love life, thought about his living arrangements. And then he thought about his financial situation. See, neither him nor, of course, Annabelle worked a single day throughout their entire marriage. The Walters family fortune had paid for all they could have ever wanted, but that money, well, between the doctor's fees and Annabelle's lavish headstone, that money was nearly gone. George had become lazy. He'd become accustomed to leisured life. If only he had another source of wealth. And then he remembered the golden arm. That arm was made out of solid gold. It must be worth a small fortune itself, he thought. But it was already buried with its owner, as per her final will. But wouldn't Annabelle want him to be happy and not destitute? And hadn't she been a bit delirious toward the end with that fever thrashing about her brain? Surely, George thought, the poor woman wasn't even thinking straight. And now, she was dead. She couldn't care if she was buried with a golden arm or not. George made a decision. He put on his cloak, for the air was chilled that November night. He brought a lantern, for the sky and the road were as dark as a cave. He creaked open the door to the tool shed and grabbed a shovel, the strongest-looking one that he could find, for he would have 6 feet down to dig through cold, hard ground. The sky was filled with clouds. No moon nor stars greeted George on his solitary march to Annabelle's grave. The wind whispered through the grass and the naked branches like the voices of creatures best unseen. George hugged his cloak tight around him and held his lantern high. Within his tiny circle of yellow light, shadows danced like madmen, and George felt his heart quicken as he approached the cemetery. George found the right headstone and plunged his shovel into the hard earth. The work got harder with each shovelful of dirt, but George worked faster as the wind picked up, and he shivered thinking of the fires back inside. Sooner than George expected, the shovel thudded against wood. He cleared away the final layer of soil and opened the coffin. And there lay Annabelle, as fair and as beautiful as in the prime of her life. Clasped across her chest, her golden arm shimmered in the lantern light. Pushing aside flimsy thoughts of betrayal and robbery, George snatched the arm and slammed the coffin shut. The arm was cold as ice, and George set it beside him as he shoveled the dirt back on top of his wife. And then he scooped up his treasure and he began the long walk back to the house. The wind grew stronger and stronger as he walked, gusted against his cloak and made the lantern sway in his hand. The wind whistled, and George thought he heard a voice carrying high and faint across the fields. He froze, eyes wide, glancing to one side and then the other. He saw no one. With each step on the frosty ground, the wind's voice grew more distinct. "Who's got my golden arm?" George hurried his walk, but the words followed him louder and louder. Who's got my golden arm? The terrified man at last reached the mansion's door, which he flung open, slammed, and locked behind him. He ran to the parlor, where Ranger's ears perked up and the friendly hound dog greeted its master. The fire was down to just embers, but even that small heat felt wonderful as George dropped his shovel and sat down. But then he heard that ghastly voice again. Who's got my golden arm? George couldn't place the sound's source. It seemed to come from the chimney, the windows, the door, all at once. He clutched that heavy golden arm close to himself, and he ran to the windows to shut the curtains. But still, that forlorn and angry cry continued. Who's got my golden arm? A ranger barked and growled to the east wall, the one facing the cemetery. The wind made the boards of the house creak and moan, and the windows rattled, and that voice went on louder than ever. Who's got my golden arm? A gust of wind came straight down the chimney and put out the embers, and George ran with that golden arm upstairs, down the hall to his bedroom, his heart thumping and his teeth chattering. Ranger's bark boomed and then was overpowered by the slam of the front door being thrown off of its hinges. The wind screamed through the house. Who's got my golden arm? George threw himself under the bed sheets, clutching that icy, cursed golden arm, and it felt heavy as iron, and he could feel the wind slam open the bedroom door. And then the wind stopped, and there was silence, followed by slow, shuffling steps and tiny thuds as pieces of frozen grave dirt fell to the floor. George held his breath and he prayed silently as those ghastly footsteps stopped just next to his bed. Who's got my golden arm? You've got it! That's a golden arm. That was written by G.R. Wilson. That's originally old campfire story. This is fun for me. What's up? Oh, I did not know that, actually. That's pretty cool. I've heard that story like told like campfire stuff like that before, like even like all the conventions and things like that used to be like in the like wood lodges and stuff. I used to tell that story. I always loved that one. It's one of my favorite ones I've ever done, and I've never like dropped it out of the show since I started. It's just like one of my favorites, which means we've gone through gross, we've gone through horror. The final one is terror, which is probably the most difficult one to fucking pin down. Because, like, can you think of any story that is a psychological horror story that is not like an hour and a half long that you have to, like, really get inside of your mind, right? Getting inside of your mind is a difficult thing to be able to do. Whenever I talk about terror, what I usually bring up is the scene from It, the other one, the old one. There's a scene from It where where Bev is looking into a sink. You guys remember this scene? I love this scene. And you start to see that big red bubble coming out. That, to me, I always thought it was Pennywise's nose. I thought he was going to come out of the sink, right? She starts to see it build up inside of the sink. And breaking that scene down, that's a terror moment. We know there's a clown that's going to kill these children at some point, right? Seeing that makes me suddenly anxious that this is going to be that clown. But then that big red bubble bursts, and it covers her in blood. It covers the sink in blood. It covers everything in the room in blood. That's your gross moment. All of a sudden, everything in this room is suddenly covered in bodily fluids. And then, she's screaming, of course, because who the hell wouldn't? And then her father comes running in, but he puts his hands into the blood on the sink, and he starts looking like real hard at the drain and saying, "What's happening? Did you see a spider?" Then we as the audience, and Bev, starts to realize that he can't see all this blood. He's putting his hands in it, he's touching her face with it, it brings us back over to another gross moment. But that single phrase of what happened, did you see a spider, where we suddenly have a disconnect from what he's seeing, that's pinning down terror. And it's so hard to do. But I have a story here. It's also written by Vincent Minnacava. He wrote this one just for me to be able to use for these kinds of shows. And I think I have enough time to be able to get through it. So one of the things I think that really helps pin down terror is by using dreams. So this is a story called Sleep Paralysis. I could see that Vanessa Barnes was under great duress when she visited my office. The young woman had bags under her eyes, and her hair was tousled and unkempt, and she kept having difficulty following our conversation. "When was the last time you had a full night's sleep?" I asked her. She glanced away, and she bit her bottom lip, carefully contemplating her answer as though it was the million-dollar question on some network game show. 2 days. It's been 2 days. I'm so tired, but I can't go back to sleep. See, I've been working as a sleep physician for 22 years, and in that time I've encountered hundreds of patients suffering from insomnia. Vanessa exhibited all the textbook symptoms: fatigue, anxiety, difficulty paying attention. But her file said she was suffering from a different disorder: sleep paralysis. The condition is not as uncommon as you might think. Approximately 7.5% of the entire population experiences episodes of some point in their life, and I've treated dozens of cases myself. Sleep paralysis typically occurs when the mind wakes before the body does. See, think of the brain as having millions of light bulbs, all connected to on-off sleep switches. Normally, when we wake up, all the light bulbs are switched on simultaneously. But in instances of sleep paralysis, there are a few misfires, and so only half the lights come on, rendering those people suffering from the disorder in a strange state of half-sleep. This can lead to a whole host of peculiar symptoms. During one of those episodes, people can experience horrible, realistic nightmares where they feel like they're awake in their bed, but they can't move their body. Hallucinations are also common, such as the sensation that someone is sitting on top of their chest or that someone is in their bedroom. This is often accompanied by an ominous feeling of impending doom or danger. Episodes can last a few minutes at a time and usually end when the light bulbs finally switch on and the person can fully awake. While the condition can't cause any physical harm to those who suffer from it, it can oftentimes cause emotional distress. Things here were beginning to make sense. Vanessa Barnes wasn't having trouble falling asleep. She wasn't allowing herself to. She had kept herself awake for the past 48 hours after a particularly nasty bout of sleep paralysis, which explained why she was so exhausted when she was in my office for our consultation. "I've been dealing with it my whole life," she told me, "ever since I was a teenager, but it's happening more frequently now. It's worse, too. Everything feels so real. It's always the same. I can't move. I can't breathe. There's someone in the room with me, but I can't turn my head to see who it is. They're whispering something directly into my ear, but I have no idea what they're saying." In our following sessions, I had to explain to Vanessa how to cope with episodes of sleep paralysis, but her bouts were growing more persistent, and I could tell the young woman was still experiencing significant emotional distress. Of all the patients I had who suffered from the condition, Vanessa's sleep paralysis had taken on the greatest toll on her psyche. I wanted to see her problem improve, so I got more aggressive with my treatments of her. I began to teach her lucid dreaming techniques, which I hoped would allow her to gain some awareness whenever she was in the dream state, and I began practicing the technique myself when I was in college, and I found that it helped to increase cognizance and control over my own unconscious mind. The treatment methods I employed with Vanessa included keeping a dream journal, meditation, and hypnotherapy sessions. By teaching Vanessa to become a lucid dreamer, my aim was that she'd be able to recognize what was happening when she was experiencing a bout of sleep paralysis, and she'd be able to wake herself up. She came by my office twice a week for 2 months. But even though recollections of her dreams had been steadily improving, she still experienced episodes every 5 days or so. I began to dive deeper during our hypnotherapy sessions in order to see if any of her past experiences may have been responsible for triggering her nightmares. "Go back to the first time you experienced sleep paralysis," I told her during one of these sessions. "How old are you?" She was already completely under by this time. Only during these sessions did she ever truly seem at peace. "I'm 16. Okay. I sent her consciousness back 10 years. "Good. Is school giving you any anxiety?" "No." "What about your parents? Are they having any issues with you or with each other?" "No." "Have you witnessed anything that upset you recently?" She paused briefly before answering. "Yes." All right, progress, I thought. Perhaps we're getting to the crux of the issue. What was it? Vanessa's voice began to tremble, and I leaned forward a bit in my chair. The video from the email. Tell me about the video. A bizarre story began to pour out of her, and the longer I listened, the more uncomfortable I became. The email's titled, "Don't Look at Me." I don't know who it's from. The name of the person who sent it to me is one that I don't recognize. It's evening. I'm home alone and bored, and I just can't help myself. It's like there's something compelling me to open it. The email contains a single link. Normally I'd be worried about a virus, but for some reason, that thought doesn't even cross my mind. It's like I feel a strange desire to click the link and see where it takes me. Adventure, excitement. The video is dark, but I can tell that I'm looking at a middle-aged man in his bedroom. It must be hot because there's 2 fans blowing and he's sleeping on top of the sheets in nothing but his boxer shorts. Books are on his nightstand. Maybe they're diaries. I can't tell what they say. The video's too grainy. It was here that I noticed Vanessa's eyes beginning to water. I postulated that whatever suppressed memory we're about to uncover had affected her very deeply. "Vanessa," I said, "how does this make you feel?" "I'm afraid. I don't know why. I'm not looking at anything scary, just a man sleeping, but I have this terrible feeling, like a black hole had opened up in my chest, and it's eating me from the inside out." What happens next? A voice begins to speak. A woman whispering. It's so soft at first, and then I turn my speakers all the way up so I can make out the words. "Don't look at me," the voice is saying. "Don't look at me. Don't look at me," over and over again. Vanessa's breathing becomes erratic here, and I could tell that despite her being under hypnosis, she was beginning to panic. I thought about bringing her out, but this memory seemed too important, and I felt like if we could get to the bottom of the issue, we could make considerable progress. I pressed on. "Who's speaking, Vanessa?" "The woman." "Who's the woman? Please continue your story." The voice repeats the same words over and over again for 2, maybe 3 minutes, steadily getting louder each time. The man doesn't wake up despite the fact that the voice is as loud at this point that I need to turn the speakers all the way down. He doesn't even move. The woman, she enters the frame, and I feel my skin get cold. Her arms, they're so long. Why are they so long? Her fingers touch the ground. I can't see her face. Her hair hangs over it like black cobwebs. Her skin is pale, snow white in contrast to the rest of the video. The woman is wearing a tattered nightgown, a pleated bodice pattern, the kind that my grandmother used to wear, but it's covered in brown stains. What are the stains? I'm afraid for the man. "Wake up," I think in my head. Wake up, can't you hear her in the room with you?" Tears had begun to stream down Vanessa's face. A part of me thought that the session had gone on long enough, but something deep down inside resisted the urge to pull her out of the hypnotic state. It was as if I was learning some powerful truth that had been hidden in the dark, in the depths of her subconscious, and just how Vanessa's curiosity had compelled her to open that link all those years ago. I had a strong desire to see her story unfold. When she comes to the camera side of the bed, I can see that her legs bend backwards like a bird. Her feet are forked, 2 large toes with sharp black nails at the end of them. "Don't look at me," she keeps saying. "Don't look at me, don't look at me." She's at the head of the bed now. She leans over the sleeping man, and with her long, lanky limbs, she pulls her hair from her face. I want to scream, but I can't. It's the most horrible thing I've ever seen. There's nothing human about that face, those eyes. It's as if they're staring right through the computer screen and into my soul. All of them. It repeats those words again. "Don't look at me, don't look at me, don't look at me." Does my scream wake the man, or does he finally hear her? I don't know. His arms move faster, then he shifts to his side, facing the woman thing. His eyes are wide. He looks right at the thing, and the creature jumps back, startled. It screams at him like it's angry that he woke up. It grabs him around the arm, and for the first time, I realize how big its hands are. He's crying. He's trying to twist away from it. He's a full-grown man, but he can't break the thing's grasp. It pulls him from the bed. It drags him across the floor as if he's a small child. The man shouts and begs to be let free, and even after he's out of frame, I can hear him, but it seems as though he's being carried off somewhere far away, and then there's nothing. Silence. I'm just looking at a quiet bedroom, and all I can hear is the hiss of his fans. The video stops, and I delete the email. My first experience with sleep paralysis happens that night, but I can't remember what I dreamt of. I end our hypnotherapy session here, and I pull Vanessa back into a fully conscious state. She's visibly shaken, and when I ask if she can recall anything from our session, she says that she cannot. I couldn't help but feel like there was something in her eyes that told me she wasn't being 100% truthful. I saw her out of my office, and I reminded her that her next appointment is that following Monday before instructing her to continue practicing her lucid dreaming techniques over the weekend. Vanessa would no-show her next 2 scheduled appointments. And when my secretary attempted to contact her, the calls went straight to voicemail. Even when I personally tried reaching out, I wouldn't get any responses, and after a few weeks, my concern for Vanessa began to fade. See, I had other patients that required my professional attention, and I couldn't waste my time on a patient that didn't want to show up to her sessions. Still, though, thoughts of her strange story during that hypnotherapy session sometimes lingered in the back of my mind. Thoughts of that day were reignited like a bonfire 2 weeks ago when I received an email from her. I was at my home in my study that evening, going through my emails on my laptop when I saw it. At first, I thought Vanessa was finally responding to my inquiry about her missed sessions, but when I read the email's title, I felt the air rush from my lungs. Don't look at me. It was just like her story. The body of the email contained only a single link. Was she playing a prank on me? Was this her way of getting back at me for digging up those terrible, twisted nightmares that she was having? The ones she's had since her teenage years. Or was her story, in fact, genuine? A part of me feared that it was, and I knew I simply wouldn't get the closure that I needed unless I found out for myself. Adventure, excitement. I reached over, I turned on my desk lamp, and then I clicked the link. The link opened on a video of a bedroom. It was evening, unlike the story Vanessa had described. The camera was in night vision mode, and the image was clear. But I gritted my teeth, and I prepared myself for whatever green hell I was about to witness. There's a woman in the bed. I looked closer, and for the second time that night, I saw something that stole my breath. It was Vanessa. She was asleep. On her bedside table was her dream journal. I recognized the ribbon hanging out of it as the one that she used as a bookmark. I watched her for what felt like an eternity, and I recognized that she was in a state of deep sleep. A creeping dread slithered its way through my mind. I thought the video had no sound at first until I realized I hadn't plugged in my headphones. And against my better judgment, I picked up the jack and I plugged it into the port. The voice had already begun. A horrible, garbled whisper that made my skin crawl. It was coming from somewhere out of the camera's line of sight. "Don't look at me," it was saying. Again and again, it repeated those terrible words. "Don't look at me. Don't look at me. Don't look at me." I realized then what was going on. I thought I prayed that this was still some kind of elaborate prank. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew this was not the case. Vanessa was experiencing sleep paralysis. What if the man that she had told me about in her story had been suffering from it as well? What if it had been the only thing keeping him safe? Please don't wake up, Vanessa, I thought to myself. For the love of God, forget everything that I taught you. If my lucid dreaming techniques ended up working and she regained her senses, she would wake up and then what would happen? The woman thing entered the frame, and it was more heinous than anything I could have ever pictured when I heard Vanessa's tale. Its limbs were of hideous proportions, knuckles dragging the ground like grotesque primates, her legs longer and lankier than I had originally expected. Just as my patient had explained, its knees bent backwards at an unnatural angle, the skin of which looked hard and calloused like the scales of a desert reptile. I couldn't see the face. Stringy black hair draped over it, and I prayed to God that whatever was behind it would stay hidden. "Don't look at me," it continued to repeat. The woman slinked slowly around the bed, and as it did so, her long, bony fingers began to tug playfully at the covers. "Don't look at me. Don't look at me. Don't look at me." My heart was beating like a drum inside my chest. The grandfather clock in my study struck 12, and the initial chime nearly made me jump out of my skin. The woman's voice grew louder, more tenacious, more aggressive, and I thought I might go mad from the sound of it. "Don't look at me. Don't look at me. Don't look at me." The woman reached the head of the bed and leaned down, parted her hair, and my mouth went dry from fright. Just as Vanessa had said, it wasn't a woman at all. Perhaps in some ways its body bore a warped and twisted resemblance to that of a woman, but the word woman would imply that I was looking at something human. And this thing's face was anything but that. It was covered in eyes. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, eyes within eyes, all different shapes and sizes. And I felt, as insane as this might sound, that they were watching me just as closely as they were watching Vanessa. They glowed like awful little emeralds on my computer screen. And I wondered what color they would be like in person. "Don't look at me! Don't look at me! Don't look at me!" I would have leapt out and run screaming for my home in that instant if I had not noticed Vanessa begin to stir in her bed. God, no, I thought. She's coming out of her sleep paralysis. The thing stood still as a statue, face just inches from Vanessa. And it happened so fast. My poor girl snapped her head around, saw the creature, and jumped back with a shriek. The creature jumped back as well, as if in shock, let out an ear-piercing shriek of its own, then lunged an arm towards Vanessa and threw the covers off of her. It gripped her around her ankles with one of its massive paws and then dragged her kicking and screaming from the bed. Vanessa tried to free herself, but just like the man in her story, the thing's grip was too strong. It pulled her violently across the floor and out of frame of the camera. The video probably ran for only 30 seconds after that, but I felt like I sat there for hours, listening to Vanessa's screams fade as she was dragged down an impossibly long hallway before the video got to black. I closed my laptop after that. I went straight to the minibar. I had a pull of whiskey. It burned like fire, and I nearly coughed it up, but I didn't care. I sat on my couch, cradling the bottle in my lap until the sun came up. It took an entire day to come down from the shock of what I had seen, but it wasn't long before the horror would return. I woke the following night, unable to move my arms and legs. There was a terrible electricity in the air. It smelled of dread, of doom, of death. The sleep paralysis wouldn't last long. My experience with lucid dreaming helped me break whatever spell had been cast over me, but even though I could move my arms and legs, that awful sense of dread, it never wavered. Instinctually, I remained as still as possible, and thank the Lord that I did. The voice started quietly at first. It was even more horrendous in person than it had been over my computer screen. "Don't look at me. Don't look at me. Don't look at me." Thank you guys so much for coming out to the Creepypasta panel. Hopefully that was a lot of fun for you guys. If you want to come see me, I'm in the dealer's hall tomorrow in row 1000, and I'm telling Mad Lib stories tomorrow at 10. Sweet dreams, everybody. What's up?